So here we are. So we do have some opening questions for you. Let's get them on the screen. Don't forget, please, to comment as we're going through, because obviously this evening kind of relies on your comments and your input.
This doesn't work without your comments.
Yes.
We need you.
Okay, no pressure. So our first opening question. How aware are you on a daily basis of the challenge of climate change? So is this something that pops up often in your life? Is this something that's not really talked about much? Is this something you don't really think about, or you do? So how aware are you on a daily basis of the challenge of climate change? I cannot escape the challenge of climate change because Jez follows me around the house switching light switches off.
You are an absolute nightmare when it comes to leaving switches on and electricity on. And that's not even just from a climate of a wasted money perspective as well.
That's why you do it.
I do it for both reasons.
Yeah.
But like in the bedroom, we've got a 3-bulb thing in the middle of the room, which lights the whole room absolutely fine. And then there's one over by the window as well.
That's perfect for straightening my hair.
But Nat will turn all 4 of them on.
It's because it's perfect for straightening my hair.
It makes no difference because it's still behind at the same angle. But Nat insists on all 4 of them on, wasting electricity and killing the planet single-handedly with their overuse of light bulbs.
I'm a terrible person.
I know, but it's okay. We forgive you.
So how aware are you on a daily basis of the challenge of climate change? So Hannah's admitting to the sin of leaving light switches on as well, which makes me feel better.
Shocking.
Rachel says quite a lot. I have to switch lights off sometimes. Is that Andrew or Rachel speaking?
Oh, that's a good point.
That's the question.
I'm assuming Rachel. Maybe she's outing Andrew for leaving lights. Hazel's quite aware of it.
Good.
Excellent. Putting things into the right recycling bin means I think about it every day. Yeah, I find that a real challenge because of the way they're set up. It's so difficult.
Yeah. Sorry, I've just noticed actually Hannah is unconfessing her sin of light switches because she's actually shaming Matt. So thanks, Hannah. I thought we were good friends.
Unlucky. You'll have to sit in the sinner's corner with Matt.
Yes, again.
This is an interesting one about looking at outdoor plants which flower much longer than they used to. I think that's something that you see, isn't it? In the way the seasons have kind of changed almost. Like last year, we obviously know when we've had our first lockdown in the middle of March, and the glorious summer sun that we had during March. Yeah. And my memories from 3 years ago, it was my probationers committee day, and it snowed, so I couldn't go anywhere, so it was cancelled. Now, obviously, we just do it on Zoom anyway, but back then, Zoom was not a thing that any of us knew. Whereas today, it's been glorious sunshine. So 3 years difference make huge.
Brilliant. So it is Rachel that turns it off. That's good. Carrie, don't really think about it, but aware and try to cut down by recycling. Yeah, doesn't they? You just sometimes need to remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing.
Do you remember at school there always used to be on light switches and things, make sure you turn me off stickers?
Yeah.
And I might get some of them for the house.
Moving on, Pam. I hate how much plastic we throw away. Yeah, from unnecessary packaging. Yeah, I bought some little noodle pot, didn't I, for lunch last week, and there was so much plastic on it, and it made us think, actually, I wouldn't buy that again, because it wasn't that good for the amount of plastic that there was. Rachel's talking about her workspace, trying to improve the environment, air pollution, sustainable travel, planting trees.
Brilliant. And Andrew says a similar thing as well, working in town planning.
Brilliant.
So Andrew has turned up. Excellent. See, just talking about the unnecessary plastic thing, I remember 2 years ago it was, and there was this big push with the supermarket saying, we're going to cut our plastic consumption in half by such and such a date. And as I was walking through Tesco, the individual jam donuts that you can get in the bakery section, all of a sudden, rather than just being individual and laid out as they were, now we're in individual plastic wrappings as well.
Ridiculous.
And I messaged you, didn't I, to say, look at this, it's ridiculous. This is how they're going to cut their plastic consumption in half, by doubling it and then getting rid of everything they've just introduced.
That's great, Sue. My awareness of the problem has come to the front of my mind during lockdown. That's great. That's a good observation, isn't it?
I think a lot of us are appreciating nature more as a result of lockdown, aren't we?
Definitely.
Brilliant.
So let's have a look. What have we got next? Are environmental concerns something that affect your choices each day? So I suppose we've touched on this a little bit when we've talked about things like switching light switches, recycling, reducing plastic, those sorts of things. What about when it comes to simple things like choosing to walk to the shop instead of drive to the shop and those sorts of things? Just having a look at some of the comments here.
So Rachel's saying about suppliers and construction companies all take into account and have environmental policies. We always ask companies tendering to say what they will do. That's brilliant.
Brilliant. That's great, isn't it? Gosh.
Jill making a point about COVID secure requirements have increased supermarket packaging. That I go along with, but these donuts were 3 years ago before COVID was even a thing, and it pops into that. That's why it was so ridiculous. Like now, I think I can get it, but.
So Hannah's saying she might cycle to work, but Bradford is quite far. I'll lay you off that one, I suppose.
Cycling along the M62 might not be too
to Bradford as well.
But I guess this one's kind of, you can almost ask yourself, what kind of changes have you made to the way you live over the last few months, few years? What do you do differently as a result of thinking about climate change and environmental issues? I know both of us walk significantly more. For example, I've done a few doorstep visits with people since we moved back to Prestwich. And when we lived here before, even though it's not that far, I would have driven for the convenience of, it's 2 minutes instead of 15. But now walking it instead. And just little things like that. It's probably not made much of a difference generally, but a little bit is what I can do.
Yeah, I won't pretend I walk more for the environment. I walk more because I don't want to be chubby. So, sorry, I can't pretend. Rachel's talking about trying to avoid the car as well. Brilliant. And Hannah, walking to the shop more.
Yeah, brilliant.
Absolutely. And we've all been forced to walk in our lockdown areas, haven't we? So I suppose it's a case of walking a bit more just because that's all we've been allowed to do.
Yeah, there is nothing else to waste time on, is there, other than walking? So the next question, the opening question set, does the climate cause you concern or stress when you think about it? So hopefully not too much, because we're going to be focusing on this a lot tonight. But how much stress and concern does it cause you when you think about some of the issues and some of the challenges that we face? Rachel talking about how the virus might actually be more likely to hang around on packaging than the item itself. A conversation for another. Let's not go into how COVID might last on plastic. That's too much.
Yep, so that might cause us stress, but does the climate cause us concern or stress when you think about it?
So Hazel's saying that she tries not to buy single-use plastic, but aware that isn't always possible. Sometimes, absolutely right, you have to. It's like when you buy those little fruit pots or whatever. If you just need something quick, that they always come with a little fork in, even if you've no intention of using it. And there's no way of getting around that.
Great, so Hannah says no to the stress, but I know I could do more to help the environment. That's a good awareness. So I suppose there is an element of concern there, if not stress.
Elizabeth saying, I do get upset about the loss of wildlife due to climate change. Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting, slightly different angle of looking at it, isn't it? Of how it's affecting nature, not just how the change in nature is affecting us.
Yeah, definitely.
This one I think is one that's really important from Mum, not for myself, but worry for future generations. And I think when you think about people like Greta Thunberg in particular, you very much hear that line of, even if you're not going to fix it for yourself, fix it for those that are to come, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Pam's just raising a feeling here that I often feel actually about climate change. It feels like a problem that's impossible to solve globally, but we can do our individual bit. I think that's really true. It's hard sometimes, isn't it, when you feel like your little individual bit actually isn't going to do much when you've got, multi-million pound companies throwing oil and those sorts of things into the sea. And it's sometimes hard to see how you separating your plastics into a bin is going to make much of a difference. But when everybody does it, it's a collective effort then, isn't it? And it does make a difference.
And I think Rachel's saying a similar thing as well, about sometimes it can be very depressing and feeling too big to solve. But it is good to see the changes that people make, definitely.
Brilliant. Sue's just saying that they've only got one car rather than two, of course giving Daryl the credit. Avoiding lamb or beef. That's interesting, as they have a more impact than chicken or fish or veg. Wow.
We avoid lamb, more to do with how extortionate it is than anything else. But I think it's also talking about different types of food and things, recognising where different meats come from and where different veggies come from. So actually, British lamb, British beef, could potentially be better for the environment than
New Zealand lamb.
avocados that are shipped in from South America. I know I remember getting very excited just before lockdown about the snack crate thing that I found, which was they sent you a little box full of snacks from different countries all around the world and trying all these different foods. And it was brilliant. We got 3 in the end over 3 months. And then it was kind of just after the third one had been sent, so just too late to cancel that one, that it suddenly occurred to me that these food items were being shipped from Brazil to America to be put in a box to be shipped to me in the UK. And then having not quite twigged that until that point, suddenly going, that's horrific. And immediately cancelling it. As I say, too late for that box. But really
sudden attack
shocking.
of conscience, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And I have to say, I'm very disappointed because I really like those snack boxes. But you know, it is what it is.
Self-sacrifice. We all have our crosses to bear.
We do indeed. A lack of snacks.
Do you think the Bible has much to say about the environment? So when you think about the environment and climate change and those sorts of things, do you ever look to your Bibles to help you make some sense of what we should be doing, how we should be behaving, and those sorts of things? So we'll just give you a couple of moments to answer that.
As I drink from this, I'm reminded of another change that we've made in more recent years, and bottled water. I remember when we first lived together. You had a massive thing about bottled water.
I did.
We went through hundreds, and that's not an exaggeration, of plastic bottles of water a month. And then eventually you saw the light.
Yeah.
And like my snack crate, they were confined to history.
An attack of common sense.
Andrew says the increasing extreme weather is concerning. Definitely.
Yeah, that's what you were just saying, wasn't it?
Yeah. Look at Texas, for example. A place where it never snows, being covered in snow. As a result of changing climate.
Brilliant. So Hazel's talking about the Bible in terms of us being stewards of creation.
Hold that thought, Hazel.
Don't spoil
Don't run with it too far. You'll never guess what reading we might be doing.
Yeah.
This is the opportunity to start going a bit deeper into some of these questions, thinking about as you say about things that the Bible says, about the church says, about how we might relate our faith a bit more to some of these questions. So Rachel using the same passage, talking about being stewards of the earth.
Can you think of any other passages to do with the environment?
It's quite difficult.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I think that relate to the general principle, but maybe don't quite name it in the same way. So for example, when Jesus is asked, who do you pay? Should we pay our taxes to Caesar? And he talks about give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God's what is God's, implying all things are God's, and therefore all things we are to look after and give back to God, including creation. And those bits of the creation narratives that kind of run throughout Scripture, where there's different bits of creation are talked about. So one that I have on my arm from Job 26 talks about all of these different things that God does. And to create the world, kind of thinking about that power that God has put into this, and thinking actually, if God spent that much time and energy on that, surely this is special.
Yeah, definitely. I find the Psalms as well often have nice imagery when it comes to thought-provoking imagery, isn't it? They are quite sensory readings, and so often it's a reminder as you're reading them of that kind of lush, abundant creation that God's created.
Definitely. We almost used a psalm for today, but in the end opted for a different one. Andrew looking right back to the very other end of the Bible, and talking about in Revelation where it says, I misclicked the wrong one, apologies.
Yes. Okay.
Where Revelation talks about the leaves of the trees being the healing of the nations. It's beautiful.
What about our churches? Do you often hear much about environmental climate change issues in our churches at all? I know we've definitely both preached on it once in our churches. I know that much.
It's something that I've talked about a few times, but it tends to come around that time, I think, of harvest. I remember one year doing a harvest service at Prestwich, and to start it off, as I arrived, before anybody else did, throwing rubbish and plastic bottles and all sorts all over the church. The idea was to have a competition of which side of the church clean up their side first and fill their plastic bag of rubbish, and making the point that one person going through and trying to clear all that would have taken ages. Didn't take long to scatter, but it would have taken a long time to clear up.
Yeah.
But all of us doing our own individual little bits, a bit like the body of Christ, brought it together.
I've just seen Moira's talked about Noah and the animals, actually, and I wonder, I think that's an important image, actually, when it comes to climate change. That almost reset, wasn't there, that God did. So God obviously created, and then things went a bit wrong, so God almost gave it another go type thing.
Wiped it off like an Etch-a-Sketch and started drawing in again.
Yeah, well, it's a reading that we tend to avoid because some of the theology and thinking around it can be a little bit uncomfortable, particularly when you have children colouring pictures and not really thinking about the message.
It's one of those Disney Bible stories, isn't it, where the real story is actually considerably more challenging than the Sunday school version we often tell.
Yeah. But I think that's a good one, actually, in the context of climate change and thinking about that idea of everything going wrong and restarting and trying to do our bit. I think, Noah's not a bad
There is actually a church biblical-based climate change, not pressure group, but that kind of charity type thing, called Operation Noah, which is one of the ones that we kind of mentioned briefly later on.
Yeah. So Rachel's just talking about doing eco-church at Presswich. So this is one of the examples of church possibly saying something about the environment.
When we had our AGM last year, one of the big things we were going to focus on in this year was thinking about how the church could be more eco-church. And then lockdown happened and put everything on hold with that for a little bit.
Yeah.
But we talked about it again at Church Council last week and said, actually, this is something we still really want to do.
I think Selly Oak Methodist down in Birmingham, I think they've got an eco-church status. Because you can actually get such a thing as an eco-church status. And I know they worked really hard down in Selly Oak to try and achieve that. I'm pretty sure they did.
Quite a bit there. There's some quite a few.
Yeah.
It's done through another charity called Arosha, which again we'll mention later on. And you can get eco-church, bronze, silver, gold or platinum, I think it is. And I think Yorkshire North and East possibly are trying to become an eco-district.
Wow.
And you can become eco-circuits and all kinds of things as well. So there's some great opportunities out there that help churches and circuits and stuff to become more eco-friendly, which is great.
And then finally, Pam's just talking about a litter pick that South Chad used to have around the community after church. That's brilliant. And as you say, a good opportunity there for conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fab. Yeah, brilliant. So should we read some Bible?
We can indeed.
So we're reading tonight from Genesis chapter 1. That won't be a surprise. I'm sure that's where most of your heads went to when we talked. We're starting Genesis chapter 1, verse 26.
Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, you shall have them for food. And every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And so it was. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day, and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation.
Brilliant. So as usual, these three questions, as we're reading that together, what stands out to you in this reading? What questions does it raise, and what does it remind you of in the Bible and in life? So some thoughts. What stands out to you? What questions does it leave you with, and what does it remind you of? Brilliant. Come up.
That was quick.
Great.
Excellent.
Go on.
So it says that God gave us the responsibility to care for the earth and everything in it, but we are failing. Yeah, it's very sadly very true. What else stands out to you as we heard that reading? What things jumped out to you as we went through? Was there anything in it for you?
Well, as I say, it's a very kind of sensory kind of narrative, isn't it? So it's almost through each day what God created, and it takes its time, doesn't it? It doesn't just say, so yeah, God took 7 days and he created all the stuff, created night and day. Instead, it goes day by day. This is what God did on this day, and on this day, and on this day, and then God rested. And it really kind of takes its time with it, doesn't it? To really, I don't know, I suppose for me it kind of almost emphasises the time spent creating, the effort that went into it, the intricacy, and I suppose the abundance as well.
Yeah, and that interconnectedness that it shows, I think, of having how all of these different parts of creation all rely on what went before. So you couldn't have the earth without having had the water. You couldn't have the plants without having had the earth. You couldn't have the animals
it's all
without having the
interconnected,
plants.
isn't it?
Absolutely.
Rachel, God made us vegetarian. I like that.
Thank God for the fall. So that means we're fine to go and eat meat. That's the first time anyone's ever said thank God for the fall.
Do you think?
Yeah, definitely. But there we go.
Any other thoughts or questions or reminders or anything like that as you've just heard that reading? No pressure, but we're not moving on to someone else. Shares?
I think it's one of those readings, isn't it, that you've probably heard an awful lot. And yet I think as you go through it, when you read the whole thing, from the start of Genesis 1 as we didn't today, right through to where we finished it in Genesis 2, as you say, going through the model that it follows, just showing that actually this wasn't just a kind of click of the fingers and everything happened. As I fully believe had God intended to do it that way, it could have happened in the click of a fingers and we could have just appeared. But actually in seeing it the way that it happened and seeing kind of all of this journey that it went on, I think shows us the importance that God placed on it.
Absolutely. We're very quiet on this one.
Very quiet. So should we skip through to the next one?
Let's give another go.
So as we mentioned, the whole story of creation is one that takes place in 2 chapters in Genesis, but then gets revisited at different times throughout Scripture, as you mentioned in particular, in the way the Psalms talk. And it presents lots of different perspectives and showing the variety that was made in creation. So what does this account and what does the whole narrative of Scripture show us about the care that was put into creation by God? And what does this tell us about the importance of understanding creation? So what does this show us about the care put into creation? And what does it tell us about the importance of understanding creation? Rachel making a good point there. I think we have, when you read these things, there's a lot of controversy, I guess, about creationism versus evolution. And I've said a number of times to different people whenever they've tried to raise this issue, actually, we're arguing about stuff that doesn't matter. What matters is both of us believe God did it. And then it's very much a question of who and why, not a how and what.
Yeah, I like that. It's good thinking.
That doesn't happen often.
No, yeah, it does. Rachel's also saying God set it all up to work perfectly. And then Andrew, God created the world for a purpose. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And that sense of purpose is a really important one, isn't it? I think a lot of what we talk about tonight as we go through, we very easily talk about for humanity and for ourselves and forget that actually a lot of what we say about ourselves and about people also relates to the whole of creation as well. So that sense of having purpose. We talk about ourselves as having a God-given purpose, having a call, but forgetting actually that, as you say, creation is therefore a purpose as well. But we don't, we forget that, we neglect that. Mum saying about everything relying on caring to keep things balanced. And yeah, showing that sense of love, I think, at the very centre of everything, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and Hannah talking about God being very specific in the kind of order of creation. And I think that might relate to the second question, actually. What does this tell us about the importance of understanding creation? And maybe there's that sense in which if we fully understand how everything is very specific, how everything's created to work together and to be interdependent of each other, us and plants, trees, animals, the whole land, the whole sea, everything's to work together in this sort of created, beautiful order, then maybe we won't take bits for granted. You know, if we realise that, you know, we're interdependent on trees and the whole dialogue of oxygen and carbon dioxide and those sorts of things, maybe we won't take trees for granted and cut them all down. You know, and in the same way, I know a lot's been said about bees lately, hasn't there, and the importance of bees to the ecosystem. And maybe there's this sense in which if we properly understand why creation works together as it does, we won't take it for granted, because we will realise that although we seem to have the dominion over the earth, we need the creation, we need the beauty and the way it all works together, or we haven't got a chance.
And if you've ever looked into anything along the lines of kind of apologetics and talking about kind of the logic and the reasons behind faith, one of the things that you'll come across without too much digging is something called the fine-tuning theory. Have you come across that?
No.
So it's essentially saying that creation exists as we know it. We exist because everything is fine-tuned to be exactly right. So if the Earth was a fraction further away or a fraction closer to the sun, life wouldn't be able to exist. If the different forces in nature were slightly different, then things wouldn't hold together and there wouldn't be planets. And following that through is kind of taken as an evidence for, well, God's hand is in this, in fine-tuning everything to be perfect. But I think it goes beyond even that into what we're talking about now, in that actually recognising, as people have said, how specific creation is and how complex everything is, and yet how it all perfectly works together so that things happen. And if you take one small element out of that, like a tiny bee, then all of it collapses.
And it's mind-blowing, as Moira says, really. There's no other way to think about it. Yeah.
Where are we up to?
So we're up to verse 26. Now, verse 26 is one of the central points for us to take away from this reading. So that's where God tells us to have dominion over the world. And if we skip to the next slide, in some translations, having dominion over is translated to mean rule over, reign over, be stewards of, have authority over. And we just wondered, what word do you prefer, really, to describe how we are to relate to creation? Because it's all about relationship, isn't it, with creation? Basically. It's not just about us standing firm in power and having the sense of authority, but really how we relate to creation. So which one of these kind of words and ways of phrasing it do you find most helpful? The idea that we have dominion over creation, or we rule over, reign over, be stewards of, have authority over.
Rachel making a really nice point about the previous question. I think much of creation is more beautiful than it really needs to be. God created it for more than pure practicality, and that's a lovely image, isn't it? Of thinking about how God is a God of beauty as well as a God of making things work.
Absolutely.
So 3 votes for stewards straight off the bat.
Not to put pressure on any of you, but I wonder why do you kind of sway more towards stewards of? And I suppose, what does it tell you about how God calls us to be responsible? But I just wonder, why do you like stewards? What does it tell you about God and what God calls us to?
Moira beat you to the punch.
Moira's the overachiever for me tonight.
They care for everything God has given us. And Hazel saying a similar thing as well. Stewards, we need to care, not feel we can walk all over things.
Yeah.
And I think this, as you said, the second question about do they tell us different things about the call from God, and it's recognising, isn't it, that the way human beings interpret those different words. So thinking about reigning over, have authority over, dominion over, there's that sense of power of I can do what I want to you because I'm in charge kind of thing. But that isn't a God-given interpretation of that. It's how humanity has interpreted it. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. But when you look at God having dominion over us and ruling over us and reigning over us, actually it comes down to that servant king, that love at the centre of everything. And so even if we read the more traditional interpretations that talk about having dominion and authority and ruling, it's always got to be taken in that context of what God means when he talks about ruling, not what humanity might mean.
Are there any there that you kind of sway to, or would you say stewards too?
I think I would probably go stewards too, just because of the baggage that comes with the others. I think they all have something to offer. But I've just spent a minute explaining why ruling over and reigning over might not mean what we think it means. Whereas I think when you hear it stewarding of something, it comes with a much more obvious interpretation. So probably easy.
Maybe I'd go reign over because I'm a princess, but no, I'd probably stick with stewards.
Andrew just saying power should come with responsibility, but doesn't always. Andrew's been watching too much Spider-Man.
Clearly.
With great power comes great responsibility.
So Pam's just saying something about responsibility, actually. That's great. When you reign, you have authority, but also responsibility to do the best for those who you reign over. We saw this on the Crown, didn't we, actually? The Crown never speaks a political opinion, because the Crown's just there as a figure. Or so
we're told, depending on whether you believe certain news articles that have come out in The Guardian recently.
Did you say all the translation? Yeah, they're all different translations. So we use the NRSV translation of the reading
Which
tonight.
said Dominion, didn't it?
It said Dominion.
Yeah.
I chose that one because it said humankind instead of mankind, and everyone knows how I feel about inclusive language. So
quite rightly. Some of the more traditional ones, like the King James, I think we're talking about ruling over and reigning over. Be stewards of, I think, was the New Living Translation or something like the Message, one of the really modern ones that's trying to say the same thing but in a very different way. But yeah, I think it's said twice in verse 26 and possibly 28 as well. But they're both the same verses, just in lots of different ways. So the last part that we just saw when we went over into chapter 2 talks about God resting on day 7. And when we think about this, we think about that concept of Sabbath, of taking the rest and the importance that this has for humanity. But actually then we wanted to expand the question, just like we talked about purpose. Does this add anything to our conversations around climate justice? And I'm just going to quickly scroll back because I think somebody mentioned this. Yeah, there. So it's Sue beating us to the punch by a long way. Back when we were talking about what does the Bible say about care for creation, I'm talking about leaving a field fallow every 7th year, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce because I might end up swearing and that's not good. And the fact that looks after the earth.
Yeah.
I remember from history talking about medieval kind of farming, because that was the exciting kind of history we did. And how they'd used to farm in strips, and what they planted in each strip would vary each time, and then one would always be left clear. And it would work through the 7, so it would always give a bit of their field a chance to recover.
I wonder as well if there's something about Sabbath and rest, in and around the idea of seasons. So how we kind of go through these natural seasons that are really shifting and changing, aren't they, right now? Like the fact we had blazing sun right at the start of March instead of snow that we had 3 years ago. But the kind of idea of seasons of being kind of blazing sun, which then rests, and the trees and the way that everything sheds and loses its leaves, and then obviously we have rain, seasons of rain, and just the way things rest, actually.
But in this country we have 4 seasons of rain, just with different temperatures.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if there is anything about seasons in the idea of rest and the environment and the weather and the trees, the plants, everything kind of resting. And then, of course, like the idea of, animals that hibernate and those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting... Yeah, that hadn't occurred to me.
Well, what can I say?
Genius in the corner. Talking of animals that rest, Raz is making a few noises because he never stops sleeping. But yeah, do you think the concept of rest and Sabbath has anything to say about climate justice, or not? Been very quiet, I think.
Great, yeah, Carrie's linking on to me, thank you. If we do not let the earth rest to recover, i.e. rainforest, intense farming, etc., the earth will collapse. Absolutely, yeah. Equator with every day more or less the same. I wonder what different view it gives. Yeah, that must be fascinating, mustn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Or I guess in the extreme form, going much further north or much further south, where some parts of the year you have no sunlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember when we were in Reykjavik for Christmas and how there was only an hour.
Yeah. So should we look to living it out today? So this is where things get very exciting, very more talkative, hopefully.
Hopefully, so just before we quickly move on, Pam just saying about seeing the benefits of rest that has come during lockdown. And there was an image that went around on Facebook recently of, I think it was Singapore, and the capital city, showing pre-lockdown and how there was a kind of smog and thick cloud over the whole city.
Yeah.
And yet a year on, after a number of different lockdowns, you could see blue and you could see the sky. And yeah, really important message, I think.
So we've touched on some of these, but what are the most important things you think of when considering how you can help as just one person, one family, one household, with the climate crisis? So I know we've talked about some things like plastic consumption, recycling, which is really important. We've also talked a bit about people cycling or walking rather than taking their cars.
Definitely.
Other kind of little things can you think of that will make a big difference in terms of our individual carbon footprints and the climate crisis?
I think the concept of recycling is an interesting one because it kind of goes, if you push that further, it goes beyond just what we do with our rubbish, but actually thinking about how much rubbish we create generally. Because it's all well and good, for example, putting our food in the brown bin, but actually then the question comes back is, well, why have you put so much food in the brown bin? Do you perhaps not need all the food that you can't buy? And therefore could perhaps that food either be distributed better, as we thought about last week, or could it not be grown in the first place? And actually could we save that bit of the earth save some of that stuff that goes into it?
Yeah. Brilliant. Sudi's just talking about stopping buying foodstuffs with palm oil in. And there's been a really, really big increase in awareness of palm oil, hasn't there?
Was it a Christmas advert last year? The orangutan in my bedroom.
That was it, yeah. Education, how fragile the world is. Absolutely. And I think that's so true, actually, that schools are really letting children know about climate change and what they can do as just one person. I think there's been a real shift to that. This shifted from just reduce, reuse, recycle from when I was in school.
Well, that was kind of what it was when we did a holiday club at Lanarkshire, wasn't it, on the Lorax?
Yeah.
And we spent 3 days looking at some of these issues with kids, and whenever, no matter however we approached it, the first answer was what could we do to what we could do better was always
reduce,
recycle.
Reduce, recycle.
Yeah.
Hazel's talking about where we buy our food and vegetables from, our vegetables and meat from. So looking for more local produce. I was horrified once when I saw a packet of cooked chicken had come from Brazil. Goodness me.
And thinking about that is thinking about kind of seasonal fruit and veg, isn't it? Because I remember we were looking at strawberries or something a few weeks ago in the middle of winter, and I think you made a passing comment about they shouldn't really be available now. Because they're summer fruit.
Did I?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. Are you sure you didn't say that?
I'm very sure
I
didn't say that.
Yeah.
But then looking on it, and it came from Morocco or something.
Somewhere like that, yeah.
And because we insist that we now want these things available 365 days a year, that then we have to kind of think about, well, actually, is that the best way?
Yeah, so do we have anyone with us who eats seasonal in terms of vegetables? I find it
Your
something
Bamp would be
definitely
a good one
worth.
for that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So my granddad, Bamp granddad, has always had an allotment right from when we were kids, and so I remember we'd only have certain veg at the start of the year or at the end of the year, middle, and those sorts of things. And whatever was in that season was what you ate. There was no kind of, oh no, I'd rather broccoli. You had what you had, and that was it. And so. Yeah, my nan and Bamp have been doing it for forever.
Doing
really.
it before it was cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can also get a lot of wonky veg now in supermarkets. I don't know if you noticed, but veg that kind of people don't think will sell because it's not aesthetically pleasing. And so they shove it in a bag together and call it wonky veg. And I think it's cute, actually. So I'd rather get the wonky veg.
If it wasn't in a bag, it would be even better.
Yeah,
But, you take what you can get. Tony and Rachel here both talking about clothing and what we wear. And this is one you mentioned, wasn't it, as
absolutely.
we were preparing?
So yeah, that idea of fast fashion. So buying things that aren't necessarily going to last, or buying clothes for the sake of buying. Real surge before lockdown when I saw that judgy face at me. There was a real surge, like when we've been allowed to shop during lockdown, of going to charity shops and thrifting clothes, actually. But actually holding to account shopping places like, I don't know if we're right to name them, but
yeah,
like
go for it.
Boohoo and Primark and those sorts of things that actually don't necessarily make clothes in the UK. They're made in sweatshops, essentially, where people aren't being paid a fair wage, and the quality of the clothing is so poor that you need to. I mean, it's the age-old comment with Primark clothes, isn't it? When I say to Jazz, you can wear your t-shirt once from Primark and that's it. And not because there's anything wrong with the t-shirt, because it doesn't last once you've washed it.
Absolutely.
But just, becoming more aware, I suppose, of things like fast fashion, where we're buying our clothes and where they're actually made.
And I think that comes back to Rachel's point here about consuming less generally, both food and things, would be good. But as she rightly says, we've got to recognise, I think, some of the challenges that come with that, and actually the pain that there might be as a result. Because actually some industries that have profited off the back of really bad and damaging practices, that it might employ a lot of people, would have a sense of reality, actually, that
absolutely
can't carry on.
But then the reality, actually, that those workers aren't being paid a fair wage anyway for their work, and it's, who's behind the company that's making the big bucks.
And I guess this comes back to, again, what we were talking about last week, in that economic justice.
Absolutely.
Actually, if we paid the people we're paying poverty wages, good wages, and gave them good stuff to work with, actually then that would benefit through in the process of saying, actually, look, we now get better quality, long-lasting stuff at the end of it, because we're training and paying our workers properly.
I should say my biggest downfall is clothes. Actually, I won't play the high and mighty here. I buy way too many clothes that I don't usually need.
Yeah.
And it's always something I say to you, is that I'm going to go a whole month without making an ASOS order.
3 days later.
And just it's just, I suppose, consumerism, isn't it? And the fact that it's right there on your phone and you can scroll through the ASOS app just as easily as you can scroll through Facebook, but it just costs a bit more.
Yeah.
What else have we had up top? Just up a little.
So Rachel's saying that her daughter went a whole year without buying any new clothes. Did buy from second-hand shops, but not from new clothes.
Yeah, so Anne just sharing something about when she was in Spain, very few pre-packed veg and lots of wonky veg. The pre-packed thing baffles me. I don't understand why we put bananas in bunches in plastic bags. Like, I can't really make sense of that, 'cause you're going to peel off the skin anyway. Same with oranges and things. Like, why would you pick it up in a plastic bag when it's loose?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Pam here talking about small independent businesses using Etsy more last Christmas.
Absolutely.
We did the same.
Yeah, we've tried that. Yeah.
And recognising actually then you can see where these things come from. You can see what's gone into them. You can see that people actually are... And also I think you see the real cost of things. Rather than buying the 20p phone case off Amazon that's been made by some poor kid in Bangladesh, buying a phone case from someone who has actually put time and effort into making it and crafting it. And making
and
it
knowing that that's going to pay for something to do with their bills or their children's dance lessons. It makes a difference to them, doesn't it, as a small company?
Definitely.
I just wonder in all of this if anybody's maybe thought about carbon emissions and home deliveries. So we all know that obviously because we've been locked down, we've not necessarily been able to go to the shops ourselves on public transport or drive and those sorts of things. And as a result, for many of us who have had deliveries, they've been coming to us from all over the country. I wonder if anyone's got an Amazon Prime account. I think most people probably do these days.
Certainly have an Amazon account, if not a Prime
I was just talking about ASOS, and I have next day delivery. You pay £10 a year, and a truck will turn up the next day as long as you've ordered it by midnight. And they'll usually be here by 9 o'clock with your parcel. And actually just the effect on that as well when we talk about fast fashion, but generally, like the kind of demand in wanting things and wanting them now. So how on Amazon you can order something the night before and it's there the next morning. But the effect actually that's having in terms of carbon emissions and our carbon footprint. And during lockdown, I wonder if, although we might have seen a kind of decrease in terms of people taking aeroplanes and those sorts of things and doing long car journeys, actually possibly not necessarily decreasing the carbon footprint because we've been having so many Amazon deliveries.
And it's the same thinking about how our homes have inevitably used more gas and electricity as a result. But we're going to blow open the conversation, hopefully, a little bit now, rather than looking at us as individuals, and think about maybe what this might look like on a bit more of a global scale. So, firstly, a really simple question, but might have quite a complicated answer. What do you know about the Paris Agreement?
Apart from Donald Trump refused to be part of it. Right?
Indeed, apart from that.
Yeah.
Because Joe Biden has now signed America back up to it. So what do you know about the Paris Agreement? Do you know anything about the Paris Agreement?
Only really about Donald Trump. And it's obviously like a kind of global commitment, isn't it, to do better when it comes to the climate crisis. I'm guessing you know more details, so I'm leaving this to you.
To be honest, I didn't. But then a couple of videos popped up recently on YouTube from different channels that I followed talking about it. And so I watched them and thought, oh, actually, there's a lot more to this. Some good and some negative. Hazel being very honest, saying she doesn't know a lot either.
I'm with you, Hazel.
We'll just see if anyone doesn't say anything before we flick through,
Okay.
just to see whether there is anything coming out. Mum being honest too, nothing.
Good.
Excellent. It's about climate change and cutting carbon emissions, and it's a good thing the USA are back in.
Yeah. That's about as much as I knew, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're going to say, rather than go into too much depth.
I think... Yeah, brilliant.
So the Paris Agreement, the general aim of the Paris Climate Agreement, which was signed in 2016, is to keep the global temperature rise under 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels, or the better one that they really hope for is under 1.5 degrees.
And do you know what it is at the moment?
And we'll come on to that in a minute.
Okay.
So if we carried on as we were, essentially it's exponential. It would never stop.
Okay.
I think if we stopped exactly where we are now, it would hit about 5 or 6 degrees Celsius, so considerably more. And the reason they've got these statistics as the figures for what they're aiming for is that if we keep it to between 1.5 and 2%, it's the point at which a number of islands, specifically in the Pacific, which is hard to say, won't be underwater.
Right.
As a result of that. If we go much above that, then they will.
Yeah.
It's a point at which extreme weather events will be less common, and it's the point at which ice can remain in the Arctic through the summer. Any higher than that, and there won't be any ice in the Arctic. 195 countries plus the EU have signed up to it. That does now include America again, and is the vast majority of countries on the planet. So I think there is just over 200. So there's a few, but not many. Although most are failing to hit the targets they've set themselves, because the Paris Agreement doesn't set a target of this is what you have to do, but instead lets all the individual countries set their own and then kind of tries to hold them to account to that. But there was a video that I saw that was talking about looking at different countries and how their targets lined up. So the top 10 polluters in the world, USA, Russia and Saudi Arabia, their targets would only limit the global temperature rise to 4 degrees. China, Japan and South Korea would be between 3 and 4 degrees. India were the only country in the top 10 emitters that would limit it to 2 degrees. All the other ones were failing. And out of all of the countries, all 195 countries, only 2, Morocco and the Gambia, were consistent with hitting the 1.5 degree target.
And where were we?
The UK, it was in the insufficient category, which is between 2 and 3 degrees.
Wow.
So better than some, but still not as good as what we were going for. So it's a really good idea, but it's missing the mark because many countries aren't even hitting these targets that wouldn't get us there anyway.
I'm interested though that here it says in 2020, because of the pandemic, there was a 7% drop
in global carbon emissions.
So it's positive.
It is, but it's also the
but
kind of
then
thing
globally not that great.
that once we go back to the way things were, chances are that won't be a long-term effect because, as you can see in the notes before that, the global carbon emissions had been rising for the 2 years before that.
Asking.
Reducing carbon emissions and
no fossil fuels.
It's not specific that I know of. It might be, but not that I've heard of about fossil fuels.
Okay.
But obviously, inevitably, if your country is trying to reduce carbon emissions, fossil fuels are going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
So what about the UK particularly in this and its carbon emissions? So I was quite shocked by some of these statistics. The UK emits around 350 million tonnes of CO2 each year, which is about 1.1% of the whole globe's emissions. Which, when you consider how small we are as a country, we're world beating in something, but nothing helpful. If we take that down to each individual person, we're each responsible for about 5.3 tonnes of carbon. Now, obviously, some of us will be way more than that, some of us will be way less, that's only an average. Yeah. But if we all committed to reducing our personal emissions by just 100 kilograms out of 5.3 tonnes, the UK total would go down by almost 7 million tonnes of carbon. And I think this shows why it's so important to think about the little things we can all do. Because actually, if all 8 billion people in the world committed to cutting their personal emissions by 100 kilograms, that would be exponentially greater than 7 million tonnes.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Hopefully
you're like Carol Vorderman tonight. Numbers, info, it's amazing.
Hopefully it's helpful.
I thought those YouTube videos are rubbish, but...
Hopefully it's helpful information, though. Just trying to give us a bit of that context of what the world is doing and what we as a country are doing and why we need to all be better at this.
Absolutely.
Because we're all missing that target of 2%, like switching
the
lights
Moira.
off. Thank you, Moira. But all of those little things do make such a difference.
Yeah.
But how then can we be more sustainable, and what are some of the most important changes that you think we can make?
So I suppose, why don't you think about this in terms of your own household? What maybe has been suggested tonight that you don't already do? What maybe could you do more? And maybe commit to it right now here tonight in the comments. Type what you're going to do. How are you going to be more sustainable? What tiny little thing are you going to do? Alright, don't put it on me straight away. Put it on you first.
I am going to use the car considerably less.
I'll start switching the lights off.
I'm going to walk to places where I can walk to rather than thinking, but it's so much quicker.
Okay. And then I'm going to take seriously my attempt at not having an ASOS parcel delivered this month. Now, I've got to tell you, I placed an order last night, so it will arrive this month technically, but it hasn't been bought this month.
I think it was timed for that intentional reason.
Yeah,
but there we go. One thing I did mean to say as we were going through, we mentioned that the UK's individual people average was 5.3 tonnes, just to put it in comparison to the rest of the world. The global average is 4.8, so we are slightly above.
Yeah.
But the EU's average is currently 7 tonnes of CO2 per year. And the US, I was shocked by this, the US average per person 16.6 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year.
Goodness me.
So, I mean, what's that? That's over 3 times what the average UK person.
Just so you know, if you're typing a commitment here to be more sustainable in the comments, we're going to ask you in 6 months' time. I'm joking, we're not, but this is a commitment. So Susan's going to remember to switch the lights off.
As is Nat.
As am I, apparently. Although I have got a personal switcher lighter offer, so I don't know why I'd need to, really.
Stop me having to go around and do it for you.
Rachel, use LED light bulbs, especially the ones that get left on. Honestly, way too much righteousness tonight in these comments.
Mum's saying about turning the heating down and putting on an extra layer of clothing. And
one thing that I know Carrie does, actually, that other people might be interested in, is using things like shampoo bars. I know Carrie uses these. So using shampoo bars to reduce your plastic in the bathroom, which is always really helpful.
And it works throughout the house as well. I know we did a whole little eco segment, didn't we, on one of our Wednesday coffee mornings.
It was more like an advertisement for Lush.
And Small.
Yes.
Definitely.
Rachel, we've been trying to eat less meat and we'll try harder. So one of the things that we try and do is to have a meat-free day a week, as you know, we were vegan, and that kind of fell away with cheese pizza. But down at Queen's, where we trained, they used to do a meat-free Monday while I was there. This was kind of driven by the students of Queen's. This was after your time, wasn't it?
It was.
But meat-free Monday, so maybe that's something you might be interested in picking up, a meat-free Monday. Just one day where you go without meat.
Elizabeth got a very important one for us in the Hackett household,
Brilliant.
I think.
Yeah.
About taking your own coffee cup to Costa. Now, we were doing this.
But lockdown, and they won't let you now, right?
I'm not sure.
Do you think we can now?
I'm not sure whether we can or not. Has anybody taken a reusable cup to Costa or
Tim
Hortons or
yeah.
Starbucks? Good save. Recently, do they still let us do that during lockdown? Moira's having a water meter fitted.
Oh, brilliant.
And saying about turning the thermostat down on the heating. Matt already has LED lights. Well, fancy that.
Well, you need to commit to something else then. I'm sorry, Matt. This isn't things you do, it's things you're going to commit to.
Yes, you can take them back.
Brilliant. Okay.
We'll definitely start doing that. Better house insulation. Use the blanket, not put heating on, go for a walk, buy food with no plastics.
Brilliant.
Insulation's a big one for us because upstairs is quite cold, because
really
we have very little loft insulation. Apparently there's 2 big rolls of it in the loft, but they're still
fitted.
in rolls.
Yeah. So we freeze in this office to do this for you.
Which means we have the heating on significantly more.
Yeah.
Because upstairs is so cold and downstairs then gets too hot.
It's true. The minute we go downstairs, it's straight off because I'd rather a blanket to the heating. So many commitments here. This is good.
Shampoo bars and soaps are great. Rachel backing you up there.
Pam's talking about having a clear out for the charity shops. Perfect.
Excellent.
And possibly buying some items for yourself if you need them while
That's
you're
something
there.
you're doing through Lent, isn't it? Of your box of taps.
I've got my 40 items for Lent in a box.
You owed about 10 more for that now, haven't you?
No, 3. Actually, Smarty. Brilliant.
Tony talking about loft insulation as we've just said.
So we've got some homework for you. Nice and easy. Would you like to do a carbon footprint checker? So as you heard, what was it, Jez? 5.3?
5.3
was the average for a person living in the UK. You can actually find out your own carbon footprint. There is a checker, and Jez is actually going to post a link to the checker in the comments. You might be curious, really, to know. So I think,
and we'll post it on the Holy Hackett page as well.
Yeah, lots more commitments coming through. So Hannah buying from charity shops, and remembering to leave my bag out for the charity shop. Brilliant.
Hope to get an electric car.
Excellent. You've talked about this,
yeah, because now obviously all of my stuff pretty much is local. And you'll be driving. We talked about getting a really good economical car for you.
Yeah.
But then, if we can afford it at some point, getting an electric one for me for a little runaround.
Matt's just committing Hannah to a meat-free day a week.
Excellent. Good
Brilliant. Sue, using the car's aircon and heaters less. Brilliant. And using Village Greens in press switch for veg. And liquid soap top-ups.
Brilliant.
Excellent.
So here is
there's
the
carbon footprint.
There are many other ones as well. So if you already know one, feel free to go and use that.
Just type it into Google and you'll find it.
And as I say, we'll post it on the Holy Hackett page afterwards, so other people might be encouraged too.
A lot of us have got our small but significant changes that we're going to make, which is brilliant. We're committing to them now, mind. We're going to check this up. We're going to make sure you do.
Definitely. And a few people have said thinking about how and where we shop and what we shop for as well. So then there's a couple of other things you can do as well. Read and study, learn more about this. Hopefully you enjoyed our little TED talk on the Paris Climate Agreement. So there's loads more stuff like that out there. We mentioned Operation Noah as one charity. We mentioned A Rocha. I think Tear Fund have got some climate change stuff. JPIT, which is the Methodist Church, and a couple of other denominations talking about public issues. I have lots of stuff on climate. And the Hope in God's Future is a really important and interesting one for most of you here. It's a Methodist Church report that went through conference a few years ago, and I think is now in its 3rd edition, talking about why this is important from a Christian perspective, what we can do about it, and how we can learn more.
So we'll post some of those, I think, after the session. We'll get some links and that for those of you who would like to read. I think it's always worth reading it because we all knew nothing about the Paris Agreement until Jez and his YouTube facts came along. So we all need to read more. And then finally, write to MPs and councillors about the importance of climate change.
And this one I think is really important this year. You may or may not know that every year there's a climate change conference that happens where ironically they fly in people from all over the world to one place to talk about climate change. But it's called COP26, and this year it's happening in November in Glasgow, so it's happening in the UK. So it's a perfect opportunity to write to your MP, write to your local councils and say, look, climate change matters. What are you doing about it? Particularly at the moment with local elections coming up, putting it on the front page of all the manifestos of people. What are they doing to help climate change?
Brilliant.
And of course, the big one that we can do about every topic is pray, very simply. So this is a prayer that we're going to use tonight. We haven't written this one. We've nicked it from Hope in God's Future, which is the Methodist Church report. So there's a few little paragraphs like this as we go through. We'll alternate in reading the paragraph, and then we'll all join together to say the bit in bold at the bottom, which might be considerably easier than trying to do what we did last week anyway.
Brilliant. So let's pray together. God, who provides what we need for life in all its fullness, we thank you for the gift of energy, providing warmth, light, access to multimedia communications. May we be mindful of how we use this life-enhancing gift. Help us to stop our careless squandering of it, aware of the big impact on climate change for poorer communities and future generations.
God, create in us a new heart and renewed lives. We thank you for the gift of transport, swift travel to diverse places. May we be mindful of how we use this life-enriching gift, which can also complicate and busy our lives. May we be disciplined about its frivolous and unnecessary use, aware of the big impact on climate change for poorer communities and future generations. God, create in us a new heart and renewed lives.
We thank you for the gift of diverse possessions which bring enjoyment and status. Make us mindful to distinguish between passing wants and true needs, to humbly recycle, reuse and reduce land-polluting waste, to see that true wealth does not rest in things.
God, create in us a new heart and renewed lives. We thank you for creating us as interconnected creatures. Make us mindful of the deep privilege of this, to honour our bodies by living a healthy lifestyle, to honour our relationships, to know the fullness of loving, laughing and suffering alongside others, to honour the precious finite resources of earth that we might have life, without depriving others of what is needful for their fullness of life. God, create in us a new heart and renewed lives. Amen. Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us tonight, everyone. It's been another really good discussion, I think.
Thank you for your comments. I think Rachel makes a good comment to finish on, really. Taking action on climate is so much easier when we work together and encourage each other. It feels so much easier to stick with it and so much more likely to make a difference.
Definitely. And so I think as well as all the things that we've talked about, you should all go away and nag your local ministers and church councils to look into the eco-church thing and actually think, how can churches be taking a lead on this and be in that prophetic voice of saying, this matters, do something about it.
So that's us told.
Indeed.
Brilliant. So thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week.